Go. On behalf of Bryant's Alumni Association, welcome to the third of a series of webinars designed to share alumni professional expertise with Bryant graduates and students. Before I turn the program over to our presenter, Professor Stanley Baran, and our facilitator, Marissa Crean, I need to provide you with some ground rules for today's webinar, which will last for about an hour. All participants are in a listen-only mode. However, we encourage you to comment and ask questions using the question and answer feature located in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. After today's presentation, you'll receive a survey. Please take a moment to provide feedback. Your comments are valuable as we expand our professional development programs for alumni. Now I'll turn the program over to Marissa Crean. She's a class of '81 and director of the Financial Development Program at the Hartford. Marissa is active member of Bryant's National Alumni Council and also serves as a career coach for alumni. Take it away, Marissa.
Thank you, Tim, and welcome everyone. I just want to reiterate one of those instructions that Tim gave you just now. Is that you are on mute, and you will be on mute throughout the whole session. The way to submit your questions is using the question tool in the lower right side of your dashboard. And as a moderator, that's my role, is to field your questions and make sure they get addressed by our facilitator, Professor Baran. And so here we go. So I'm proud to introduce today's presenter, Dr. Stanley Baran. Stanley is a professor in the Department of Communication at Bryant. In fact, he founded the Communication Department, which has graduated more than 500 students since 2002. In his 40-year career, Stanley has published on topics ranging from television violence to online journalism. He has literally written the book on communication theory called Mass Communication Theory, Foundations, Ferment, and Future. It's in its 7th edition and available in most bookstores. I am trying to advance my script here. Sorry, everybody. So let's see. I'm sorry, my script got all messed up. Here we go. Sorry for that. So the book is in its 7th edition and available in several languages, including Chinese. And like many Bryant faculty, Stanley appreciates the personal relationships he forges with students who later become alumni. I'm happy now to return the microphone over to Stanley and today's presentation on your on-the-job writing toolbox.
Hi, everybody. This is Stanley Baran. My 2 children are alumni. I'm part of the National Alumni Council. I think alumni are extremely important to any university, but one like Bryant that stresses relationships, I think they're particularly important. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what you're about to see, where it came from. And I don't know if you got it from what Tim said, but I'm going to cover a lot of things. But if you have a question during, submit it, and Marissa will either decide this is a good point to interrupt, and I'll deal with it at the moment, or we can save it to the end. But I'm sure you will have questions. I don't know if any of you are Stephen King fans, but one of my favorite Stephen King books is called The Writer's Toolbox. And half of it is about Stephen King, his career, his car accident, and the like. But half of it is what he calls the writer's toolbox, the things you have to have. So what I did over the many, many years of teaching writing here at Bryant and doing seminars for staff and other folks, little writing seminars, is I've condensed it down to sort of the essentials, the really simple little things that if you keep them in mind, and if you know, as a musician might say, if you get them under your fingers, they become automatic and they will dramatically increase the quality of your writing. I mean, just they're little errors that you never really think about that are easily correctable, that when someone is reading your writing, the absence of errors makes your work seem that much better. Okay, people see mistakes, they don't see not mistakes, and that's what you want to go for. So this is, again, I have to give some credit to Stephen King, but here's the professional writer's toolbox. Always tell a story. Writing today, you can look, is all about narrative. We think narratively. When someone tells you something, someone tells you what they did on the weekend, someone tells you what they expect from you the next day at work, it's almost, if they don't give it to you in story form, you will put it in your mind in story form. So always think, where do I want to start? Where do I want to end? And tell that story. So even a recommendation, if you think about a recommendation letter, you begin with, I've known Larry since 1982. He was my student, or he was my coworker. We automatically think narratively, so keep that in the back of your mind, even with emails, that you want to tell a story. And sort of 1A under that is always write like you speak. Don't try to be too fancy. Don't try to be overly sophisticated in your sentence structure. Tell the story exactly the way you would tell the story. This is directly from Stephen King. Write with the door closed, rewrite with the door open. And what he means by that is your first pass, do the first pass for you. This is what I want to accomplish, even a memo or an email. Then, on your second pass, open the door. Now the question is, that may be what I wanted to say, but is this going to be what's taken away from this memo? The worst thing in the world to do professionally, excuse me, is send a memo or an email without proofreading it. And we'll talk about proofreading in a little bit. But never send out your first draft of anything. Your first draft is always the story you want to tell. But what you want to go out is what you want the other person to take away from your story. Use the first word that comes to mind. If it's what part of the story you wanted to tell, and if that's the way you were speaking, that's what you should put on paper. I tease my students all the time, and everyone listening was at one time in his or her life a student, and I guarantee every one of you has used the word plethora in a paper that you submitted for a class. Nobody says the word plethora. But why do you put that in a paper? Because you want to sound smart. One of the things, and I don't know, the further you get away from school, if you're able to break this habit. But when you're in high school, you always are told two things. One, give me 500 words. So the writing is always up to somebody else's word level, not what I want to say. So what ends up happening is we, in high school in particular, when we start to write seriously for the first time, we become accustomed to overwriting, putting too much in, too many words. And then the other thing is, you know you're going to get graded, so you want to sound extra smart. So you end up with words like plethora and heretofore. The first thing I do when I teach writing here at Bryant is I try to beat that out of my students. Tell a story, say what you want to say. What's important isn't what you put down. What's important is what people take away from it. And that's where your writing should be directed. So remember, you are not paid by the word. So I'd like you to take a minute to read these few lines and then see if you can tell me what's going on.
And this is Marissa just breaking in. I've gotten a couple messages that some people are having trouble hearing. I don't know if it's just from a couple people or is everybody having a problem. If you're having a problem, maybe you could let me know on the chat and just send it to everybody. Or if we have to kind of fix something Because I hear the professor quite clearly. I just don't know if everybody else can.
Well, I'm certainly capable of talking louder, as my wife will attest.
I have a few people writing in that they can hear loud and clear, hearing very clearly. So I think it's okay. I'm sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to make sure.
Nope, that's fine.
Okay, great. So
All
I
right.
think if maybe you're having a little trouble, just drop and come back. I see one person did that, and it's all good. Thank you,
All
folks.
right.
All right, so
Okay.
go back to reading this slide.
Yeah. So the first line, she manipulated the garment in a cogitative mood. What does that say that in English? She looked at the garment thoughtfully. She vocalized. This attire is verifiably marvelous. What is it constituted from? Say that in English. From the most meritorious velveteen, defined her interlocutor, simpering coincidentally. It's made out of velveteen, the salesperson said offhandedly. What's it cost is what the next line means. The salesperson said, it's $5.95, do you want it or not? So this maybe is what you wanted to say, but nobody's going to take away what you want them to understand from what you wrote. Write the way you talk, tell a story. Number 4, know your grammar. You can't break the rules if you don't know the rules. If there are any musicians out there, you know that there's a big difference between improvising and just making sounds with your piano or your saxophone or your violin, because you know the structure of the music. You know what people expect inside the various pieces of that music. You can go beyond them to make meaning or to create a mood or to create an impression even better than what they would have expected. So if you look at the next sentence, ain't no way I'm taking the red eye to Cleveland, grammatically horrible sentence, but it's far more emphatic than if you'd said, I would prefer not to take the red eye to Cleveland. If you know the rules, you can break the rules to your advantage. Number 5, avoid trite phrases such as this point in time and the fact that. Stephen King calls this kill your darling, especially if you have to write a lot of memos, a lot of emails, a lot of analyses of student papers, as I have to do. You start to find, again, your darlings, those little tropes that help you move the sentence, move the paragraph, move the point that you're trying to make. But ultimately, what those become is a trap that limits you. So try to get rid of those. Again, they're born from having to write 500 words, but they end up staying with us, and they add nothing to your writing. And in fact, what they do is they get in the way of your meaning. So here are some standard ones you see all the time. The training experience was useful. What does experience add to that sentence? Training was useful. She proceeded to begin typing. She began typing. She ignored the fact that I'm the supervisor. She ignored that I'm the supervisor. It's a fact. You don't need to tell people it's a fact. Even more, because these you see all the time. Ron is a man who, Ron is the type of person who won't take no for an answer. Ron won't take no for an answer. Managing people is something I'm good at. I'm good at managing people. I will work literally all night. No, you won't. Literally doesn't mean very. We'll talk about that in a minute. Good writing skills are valuable in today's society. My students give me this one all the time. Good writing skills are invaluable. They were invaluable in yesterday's society. They're going to be invaluable in tomorrow's society. Simply, good writing skills are invaluable. This is a tough one. It is too easy to write in the passive voice. So we do it somewhat automatically and a lot of times out of our consciousness. So let's spend a minute on what we mean by the passive and active voices, and then we'll talk about what the problem is. In the active voice, the actor and the action are clearly identified. The truck tows the car. You know who's doing the towing. You know what was towed. Bob fixed the door. You know who did the fixing. You know what got fixed. In the passive voice, you end up flipping the verb in the object. The car is, the verb in the subject, sorry. The car is towed. Look up here. What is the object of the action? The car. Down here, the car becomes the subject of the sentence, and the action becomes the end of the sentence. Who towed the car? The door was fixed. What's important? That the door was fixed or that Bob fixed the door? What the passive voice does is adds extra words very often. The dog was bitten by the man bit the dog. To make the passive voice happen, you very often have to put additional words there. As much as you can, always write in the active voice. The active voice is direct, and your reader will appreciate that. When you write, and we'll spend a little time on this at the end if people want me to go back over it. Always think, and this is why you write narratively, always think forward propulsion. Every sentence should move forward. Every sentence in the paragraph should have forward motion. And every paragraph should lead to the next paragraph. You always want forward motion. So I made a mistake. If you look at the next sentence, a mistake was made. The mistake ends up in the beginning of the sentence rather than the end of the sentence. So now what's the next issue? Who made the mistake? You lose your forward momentum. Always write in the active voice, and it's called active for a reason. It gives your sentences propulsion. 7. Stephen King makes a big deal out of this. The adverb is not your friend. As he says, if you need them, you haven't done the job. So you see in memos, certainly you see it in student writing, you see it in emails, really, very, quite, rather, definitely, so what, somewhat, so. They don't add anything to your sentence. I was somewhat tired. No, I was tired. The work will definitely be done tomorrow. If you're a manager and one of your people writes to you and says, the work will definitely be done tomorrow, what is that worker, that employee implied to you? That there's some question whether the work will be done tomorrow. Otherwise, he or she would not have had to tell you that it would definitely be done tomorrow. The work will be done tomorrow. It's active. It has forward propulsion. There are no unnecessary words. And the meaning that's conveyed is exactly the meaning that you want. And by the way, literally doesn't mean really. This is my daughter. I worked for years to get my daughter to kill literally. She literally killed the assignment. No, she didn't. She would go to jail, depending on what the assignment was. Use literally only when you mean literally, meaning in actuality. All right, so I'll slow down a little bit for us to take this quiz. When an employee checks in, they should get their keys. Correct or incorrect? So the poll's open. Your choices, I think, are A and B, correct or incorrect. And there should be a C, and that is, I see it all the time, and I'm not sure.
So the poll's open. We're just going to give some folks time to vote. Looks like we got about 60% voting. We'll close it up in a couple of minutes, and then we'll share the results with everybody.
And when we get to the end, if I don't remember, somebody remind me. I want to talk about this particular grammatical issue. Believe it or not, this is extremely controversial among people who teach writing, and it has, believe it or not, massive political overtones. So maybe I'll do it after the next couple slides, and we can spend a minute on this. So how are we doing on the poll?
So we close the poll, and Marissa, would you like to share the results? It looks like we have, 78% said no and 22% yes. So what's the answer, Stanley?
Well, listen, first of all, if we have that many people who say no, clearly they got a quality education at Bryant University. The answer is no. The subject, employee, in the pronouns they and their are not in agreement. Employee is singular, they and their are both plural. So these two sentences are grammatically correct, but one is better than the other. When an employee checks in, he or she should get his or her keys. Or B, when employees check in, they should get their keys. So, which is better, A or B?
Got another poll that we're going to launch right now. And give some time.
And for those 30% that got it wrong, you still got a quality Bryant education. You just forgot.
So, got about 60% now voting. And I'll give a few seconds for folks to finish up. Now it's about 70%. I think, see if everybody's chance. That's good, about 75%. We'll close the poll and we'll share the results. Looks like 72% said sentence B was better and 28% said sentence A was better.
Again, that's that quality Bryant education. The second sentence is clearly better. Look at the first sentence. When an employee checks in, if you say he, you're going to shut out half your audience. If you say she, you're going to shut out half your audience. There's that problem. But then when you get to the possessive pronoun, then you have to do his or her. So you've added significantly more words just in pure numbers than you needed. Plus, it's an awkward sentence. So the standard rule is, when you are writing in general, the clerks, employees, our customers, always write in the plural. And that way, their works. They and their become automatics. So you're grammatically correct. You have offended nobody because you misstated their gender. And you've produced a clearer sentence. So let's spend a minute on this issue because there's a bigger issue with regard to writing. So this was already, as you can imagine, over the last several days, because of the efficiency of Bryant University Alumni Office. But just yesterday morning, I read an article that began, "Stop being a grammar snob, allow the plural pronoun they." And the writer went on to say, oh, come on, who really cares? We've been using they, this sentence, for years. But there's another argument for it, too. There, the T-H-E-I-R, and the they, in an era of sensitivity about gender identification, in an era where we are respectful of people's fluidity in their stated or sometimes unstated gender, they and their takes us away from the masculine and the feminine. But my argument would be, if you want to do that, and that's a wise thing to do, then just make this plural. And that way you're grammatically correct and you're culturally sensitive as well. Then there's the second issue. You are a boss. You're hiring. You're making recommendations for team leadership. One of these sentences suggests economy of thought, economy of expression, that someone does know not only the formal rules, but how to use the rules to his or her advantage. So you are what, this is what we talk about in the comm department all the time. You are what you communicate, whether it comes out of your mouth or whether it's on a piece of paper. A says, I know the rules, look at me. B says, I know how to use the rules to get my meaning across. I guarantee you, you might not even reflect on it, but you would be happier to see B than you would A from someone who's working with you or for you. All right, this is a problematic one.
Professor Baran, it's Marissa. I want to break in a little bit before you move on and ask you about commas. Would it be appropriate to have a comma after, check-in?
Marissa, would you say it one more time? I know it's about commas.
Yes. So I'm just wondering if it would be appropriate to have a comma after the check-in. When employees check in, comma, they should get their keys.
Okay, we're going to do it with the good one. All right. Excellent question. Read this is another thing I tell my students. And if you're sending a memo or an email, that means it's relatively short. Read it out loud, because you can hear mistakes far more easily than you can see mistakes. So let's read this sentence out loud. When employees check in, they should get their keys. I would not put a comma there. Now, would a comma here be incorrect? No. But in current writing, and again, just this week I read an article about, there was if any of you got the New Yorker this week, there's a man sitting with someone who appears to be his attorney, and the attorney says to him, maybe he was talking to the wife, anyway, the attorney says to the client, misuse of the comma is not grounds for divorce. Okay. In contemporary writing, if you have any question about whether a comma should go, then it probably doesn't go. You would not be correct, you would not be incorrect to put a comma here. But contemporary writing, which seeks efficiency, which seeks forward propulsion, you would, in my mind, be more stylistically correct as opposed to grammatically correct if you did not have the comma here. You're going to see, interestingly, the final slide of this whole presentation has a comma issue, and it's a Stephen King quote that I have a real serious issue with. I mean, I would defer to him, but maybe he wrote it a long time ago before the convention changed. But I would not put one there. If you were my student, I would do the delete sign, but I wouldn't grade you down on it. I would not put a comma there. And again, read the sentence out loud. You wouldn't pause there. All right? All right. Semicolon. The semicolon is a troublesome but useful friend. If you want to go back to the notion of forward propulsion, always moving your sentences forward, an individual sentence forward, sentences in a row forward, you'll see why the semicolon is very valuable. But the problem is, it's the rules surrounding its use are very often ignored. So, use a semicolon to connect two related phrases. This gives you propulsion, because the pause in a semicolon is less of a pause psychologically, or if you read it out loud, than if you put a period there. I mean, let's read this sentence. Use a semicolon to connect two related phrases. Period. Each half must be a complete sentence, but do it with the semicolon. Yes, I'm fixing it, because clearly I'm the one reading it, but you get my point. Use a semicolon to connect two related phrases. Each half must be a complete sentence. This clearly is the spawn or the child of this. The semicolon says these two are very, very closely related, so much so that I want you to consider this as a whole. If we were grammarians, we would call each side an independent clause or an independent phrase. This could stand alone as a sentence. This stands alone as a sentence. So you could put a period here and capitalize this. But a semicolon, if this is what you mean to say, the semicolon joins these two thoughts much more closely than a period. So here are a couple examples. Good. Ask for what you want, accept what you get. You can see that this is the parent of this. Bad. I'll never forget the night of the circus when I met the trapeze artist who changed my life. This can stand alone as a sentence. This cannot stand alone as a sentence. Think about this. Take the when out of there. I'll never forget the night of the circus. I met the trapeze artist who changed my life. That's a hugely powerful sentence. Why did I never forget the circus? Before the person even can put those words together in his or her mind, say I did it, before people can even put that sentence together in their minds, you've answered it for them. You have moved them in the direction you want them to go. All right, here's another good one. One day she says she's at death's door. The next day she's ready to rock and roll. The first one can stand alone. The second half can stand alone. Here's a bad one. It's not that O'Hara's position is wrong. It's that he misses the key point. What's wrong is both of these are independent clauses, but you don't have the semicolon. So when you use the semicolon, you have to watch a couple things. Does each side stand on its own? Independent clauses can each be its own sentence, and here not. And if they can, you want the semicolon, it's not the comma. It's not that O'Hara's position is wrong, semicolon. It's not that O'Hara's position is wrong, semicolon. He misses the key point. You don't even need this. That's how closely connected the semicolon makes your two thoughts. So here's the other thing. The other problem with semicolons. It often comes before certain transition words. And therefore, if you do that, you must have the comma following the transition. Kind of everybody knows the however. So much so that people will often make the mistake, I ran to the store however cold I might have been. That however is not a conjunctive however. That's not a however that's joining two halves. That means, that however means nonetheless kind of however. But when you use these terms, otherwise, nevertheless, instead, for example, besides, Therefore, in other words, on the other hand, meanwhile, furthermore, unfortunately, then you have to have the semicolon. But you must then follow this with a comma. So here's an example. Bentley is a great university. However, Bryant is better. You can take the however out, and it still makes sense. But the minute you put the however in, you must have this semicolon, and you must have this comma. If you don't have this comma, what does it mean? However, Bryant is better. That means, like, in what way is Bryant better? So you need this comma to ensure that this becomes its own standalone sentence or independent clause. So here's another one. Facebook and texting have become popular ways to communicate, semicolon. Nevertheless, emailing and telephoning are still quite useful. Nevertheless, in this case, operates exactly like we all know, however, to operate. So you see, as valuable as they are, because they propel sentences, they allow you to connect thoughts more closely than a period in a capitalization would allow. They bring with them certain rules that you have to remember, or you end up, sinking your own effort. So just a little comedic interlude.
Professor, I know I don't want to interrupt your comment here, but I want to go back a page to the trapeze artist. One more. There we go. So one of our participants asked, what if you change that bad sentence, I think the second phrase, because I met the trapeze artist who changed my life.
You know what? This is someone trying to catch me. No, you would use the comma, because because here. Oh no, I don't. This was the best night of my life because misspelled, because I met the love of my life. See, first of all, I would never write this sentence because you have two lies in there and you want to vary your word choice. So this was a group. What did I say in this?
Right.
Oh, I'll never forget the night of the circus. I'll never forget the night of the circus. I'll never forget the NIGHT of the circus because I met the love of my life. What do? This is one complete sentence. Yes, this can stand alone, right? Now let's see this. Because I met the love of my life can't stand alone. So let's do this. Semicolon, because I met the love of my life. This preposition connects to this sentence, so you can't have that. So look at this sentence, and you absolutely can disagree with me. This is stylistic. I'll never forget the night of the circus because I met the love of my life. I'll never forget the night of the circus. I met the trapeze artist who changed my life. Don't you think the second is better? That the two thoughts are more closely connected with the semicolon than with the because? But there's another issue here. There really is my semi-closing slide that I will briefly mention now, and then I'll talk about it when we get to the end. You say what you want to say. If this is closer to what you want to say and the meaning you want your reader to take away from it, go with this. Or, every bit as important, if you are unsure about the semicolon rules, then don't go into the briar patch. Write it this way because you know that you are correct. And I'll come back to that theme when we get near the end. But that really was a great question.
Great, thank you.
So here's the little joke. Constructed properly, you can do 5 pages with semicolons. You probably don't want to. 9. And I won't read it out loud because then that would kill the joke. Proofread everything. Absolutely everything. I will tell you an absolutely true story. And I've never admitted this publicly. So I was, in my first year here, I was on a committee called Institutional Resources Committee, IRC, I think is the name. The university would contract or commission or pay for surveys. You know, before freshmen came in, after they've been here a while, you all alumni get a survey about your time at Bryant, and plus there are commercial surveys you can buy. And our job was to look at all these data, and we would advise whatever office was involved based on our reading of the data. So I was tasked with writing a report, and I got into the habit of whenever the other thing when you write, tell a story, get to the end. Do not get bogged down. Stephen King writes 1,000 words a day. It doesn't matter. Put the words on the paper. You don't have to do 1,000 words. You're not a novelist. But get to the end. Remember, you're writing with the door closed. So it doesn't matter if there are grammatical errors. It doesn't matter if your sentences are clunky. Get it down on paper because the door is closed. But then you have to proofread because it's going to be read with the door open. So anyway, I wrote this report, and I knew that there were places where I needed to add more detail, or I was unsure of the assertion I was making. And I got in the habit of putting my wife's name in those spots. So when I went back to do my final overview, my final rewrite, I would just search for, my wife's name is Susan, I would just search for Susan, and it would take me exactly to that spot, and I could make my fix, search for the next Susan, it would take me to that next spot, and I could make my fix. But of course, I would forget to delete the Susans. So I submit my report, and the gentleman who ran that office walked down to my office and asked me why I kept uttering in the middle of my report my wife's name. I failed to proofread. The most basic rule of all writing, I failed to proofread. So here's another little joke. Never underestimate the importance of proofreading. So I'm sure I have some HR people out there. What would your caption to this be? Never send this email at work, even if you do proofread. All right, here's the thing I wanted to spend more time on. Any sentence you write, unless you copy one of these, more than likely no one has ever written that sentence before. You have created something absolutely brand new from scratch. You are the creator. You are omnipotent. So you can decide, do you want to do because, or do you want to do the semicolon? Do you want to write in the active, which you should, or do you want to write in the passive? You want to write in the passive because you're trying to deflect responsibility. You know, you had 7 people on the task, and only 5 did the work. So you might say, my committee completed the task, but then you're giving credit to people who didn't do the work. So maybe in this case, you might want to write, the task was completed. And then that opens the door for your manager or whoever you're writing to say, what do you mean the task was completed? Who completed it? And then you can talk about who contributed and who didn't. There is a time to use the passive. But when you sit down, especially with the door closed, you are omnipotent. You write down what you want. So let's go back to the when employees get their keys, when employees sign in, they should get their keys. You are free to be grammatically incorrect. You are free to be, if this is an issue for you, you are free to be culturally insensitive, showing limited concern for the genders implied in those pronouns. You are absolutely free. But with that great power comes great responsibility. When you write, you are presenting yourself, but you are also presenting your team, your business. If you talk to the folks next time you're on campus, or maybe even when you were here, if you talk to the folks at the Amica Center, they'll tell you that they interview all of the people who employ our students every year or who have our students as interns. And they say, what are the most important qualities when you hire someone or when you advance someone? And invariably, the answer comes back, writing skill and speaking skill. And most of you, I would bet, would feel the same thing in your own professional lives. And that's why when Susan and I do these, we typically do them together, writing and speaking. But why are those the 2 most important skills? Because someone who's reading your writing knows that you were omnipotent, knows that you were completely and absolutely free to do as good a job, as bad a job, as culturally sensitive, grammatically correct, or culturally insensitive, or culturally incorrect, as you wanted. You've shown them what you think about yourself and what you think about them when you take just a little bit of time to present the best you can through the way you write. And these are 10. Again, these come from Stephen King. Don't believe me. I write textbook. Nobody cares. Stephen King writes books that get made into movies. Everybody cares. So if you don't take it from me, take it from Stephen King. And I have one more slide, and then I'll take your questions. Oh, actually, no. Here's the Stephen King slide. If you want to be a writer, you must do 2 things above all others. : That's correct. Read a lot and write a lot. If we did a poll on this one, I guarantee most of you would think this comma is unnecessary. What do you have to do? Take out a lot. You have to read and write. You don't have to read and write. This is a grammatically incorrect sentence, although I would never tell Stephen King to his face. So, do you have any questions or writing problems that vex you, that you constantly run up against? If you ask them, Marissa will pass them on to me, and I'll do my best to answer them, and I'll go to my Word slide, and we'll see if we can put them up and fix them.
So Professor, while others are thinking about questions that they might have and want to throw them out to you, one that came up a little bit earlier is about contractions, things like don't, could have, could have, do not, cannot, and when is it appropriate to
Use them?
use contraction?
Always. Always.
Oh,
It's the way you
always.
talk. Always. Why would you not? The grammar gods gave us this wonderful device. Why would you not take advantage of it? Look at this. Now's the time to ask.
Perfect. Here's another question. That's great. When to use I versus me?
Okay, I'm going to give you a weasel answer to this one. When it's grammatically correct. No, I battle my students on this all the time. So, give the book to me. Me is the subject of this preposition. Give the book to I. Terrible. You can hear the mistake. So if it's the subject, I gave the book, you wouldn't say me gave the book. So those are the easy ones. Here's when it gets tough. Jim, that's the Swedish Jim. Jim gave the book to Sally, and this is the one everybody gets wrong. Everybody wants to do this. No, me, because this is the object. So if you substitute, what the rule, the trick here is take out the Sally. Jim gave the book to me. You would never put I. And you can, listen, when you get my wife in a couple weeks, ask her if I'm making this up. I scream at the television. World-class professional writers on the very best television shows out there, on network news shows, always make this mistake. This one they would never make. But as soon as you put in there, all of a sudden, people forget the rule. And I'm telling you, unless it is the subject of the sentence, it's always me. So you should just mathematically, you should be using me more than I. Hopefully that made sense.
That's very helpful. That's very helpful. Here's another question for you. If you have 3 items, do you use a comma after the second item?
I have to tell
red,
you,
white, and blue.
this is seriously. Okay, I have 3 publishers. One is McGraw-Hill, one is Oxford University Press, and one is Cengage. They each have a different rule book. The New York Times, for example, says don't use the last comma. The New York Times and Cengage would tell you that's correct. McGraw-Hill and Oxford Publishing, Oxford University Publishing, so I vote for them, they would tell you do this. So here's the deal. Neither is correct or incorrect, or both are correct. But whatever you start with, you have to stay that way. You can't do this, and then the next time you have a series, ignore it. So you choose the one that meets your style, and then you stay with it. I like it because I think it's cleaner. But again, one of my publishers, red pencils it out every time I use it.
Basically, just be consistent, you think?
Right. Again, you're omnipotent. If you say if you say that people should walk on 2 legs, then all people should walk on 2 legs. If you say it's all commas in the series, then it's all commas in the series.
We have one more question, and this goes back to one of your first slides in the deck that spoke to keeping it simple, basically. Not using complex words. And
yeah.
and the our participant is he probably observes a lot of associates maybe are afraid to use boring common words when writing to upper management that they're trying to impress.
Yeah. All right. Did you ever read the New York Times Magazine, Sports Illustrated, Time Magazine? These are world-class writers, and they don't use $7 words. Fancy words stick out. To write like you speak and to tell a story doesn't mean to write with boring words. Okay, I'll give you, let's go here. And I have to go teach it a little bit. Okay, ready? I find flying airplanes fun. All right, that's an all right sentence. Which is better? Which is the more exciting sentence? Which sentence has propulsion? Which sentence encourages the reader to want to read the next sentence? It isn't about using all little words. It's about using the right word. When you talk to your friends, you don't talk only in boring words, but you use words that are appropriate for that setting or that moment. The danger of a too fancy word is the connotation above everything else, so it will stick out. So none of this says write simple words. What this says is write simply. So let's say you have regular words. So you know how you dress it up. You use the semicolon. You have a nice mix of simple sentences. The dog ran. Compound sentences. The dog ran because food was waiting. And then compound sentences, that's the one with the semicolon. The dog ran, semicolon, his master had put out the food. So vary the length of your sentences, vary your style of sentences, but write from your own experience and write from your own vocabulary. That's not the same unless you are a boring speaker. And if you're a boring speaker, you're probably going to be a boring writer, and using fancy words isn't going to dress it up. Put yourself, put your personality, put your experience into what you write, and you'll see that the words will come automatically. Where you might want to pull the thesaurus out, and I still would advise against it, is if you find yourself using the same word over and over and over again. Then search your memory before you go to the thesaurus. But telling a story and writing like you speak is not the same as writing boring. All right?
Fantastic. And I know we're out of time now. So, Tim, do you want to take it back?
Everybody, thank you very much.
I sure will. On behalf of Bryant Alumni Association, I'd like to thank Professor Baran and Marissa for a great presentation. Most of all, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. Please look for a survey in your email. We'll be going out soon. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you, and have a good afternoon, everybody.